Before explaining two good one-factor cases, Otaki general equilibrium condition in graphs, I'd like to explain in more detail about production possibility frontier, right? So here, MRT is a slope of PPF. Then how PPF is constructed, right? So that is basically PPF constructed from this condition. L1 plus L2 is L bar. Labor demand in sector 1 in two-good model, two-factor case, right? Labor employment in sector 2. That is demand for labor by sector 2. Labor demand by sector 1, right? So think about production function. You can find L1 and L2, right? That is this one. So L1 plus L2 is total demand for labor. And L bar, this is demanded by firms, as I said before. And L bar is labor supply by household. In certain period, certain year, L bar, supply of labor is just constant number. So I said L bar. Okay? Similarly, in two-factor case, K1 plus K2 is K bar. Okay? These two conditions, using these two conditions, we can derive production possibility frontier. You studied this in intermediate level microeconomics. So anyway, just you have to understand that production possibility frontier is constructed from this labor and capital condition, equilibrium condition, full employment of labor condition, full employment of capital condition. From here, we can construct production possibility frontier, right? In two-factor case, so production possibility frontier, X variable is Q1, Y variable is Q2, and concave to origin like this. This is derived from this one in two-factor case, right? Now, also think about production possibility frontier in one-factor case. So production function of one-factor case is Q1 is just 1 over AL1 L1, specified like this. And there is no capital employment or capital demand, right? So production possibility frontier in two-good one-factor case is derived from L1 plus is L bar, full employment condition of labor. Can you understand? Right? And more specifically, we assume that QI is equal to 1 over ALI, LI. Right? That is production function. In other words, Q1 is 1 over AL1, L1. Thus, L1 is equal to AL1, Q1. Right? Similarly, L2 is equal to AL2, Q2. This one, so inserted here. Then we can construct production possibility frontier in two-good one-factor case. Right? Imply that. Then this one is AL1, L1 plus AL2, AL1, Q1 plus AL2, Q2 should be equal to L bar. Okay? That is production possibility frontier in two-good one-factor case. Rewriting this, because Y variable is Q2, X variable is Q1, we know that Q2 is equal to L bar over AL2 minus AL1 over AL2 Q1. Right? So in two-good one-factor case, we can specify production possibility frontier like this. You can draw this one like this, right? Q1, Q2. Okay? Then what happens? Q1 is equal to 0. Then Q2 is L bar over AL2. Right? If Q2 is equal to 0, then Q1 is equal to L bar over AL1. So we can derive this kind of production possibility frontier. Two-group one-factor case, production possibility frontier is just straight line. Two-factor case, production possibility frontier is like this. MRT increasing and increasing. Negative increasing slope case, right? But this case, in two-group one-factor case, MRT is negative constant slope case. MRT is constant, simply talking. So, for example, that is Q1 and that is MRT is just constant. What is this? Change in Q2 over change in Q1, right? Absolute numbers of change in Q2 over change in Q1, that is AL1 over AL2. Slope of this one is AL1 over AL2, or this one, first order condition, we know that. Right? Production possibility frontier constant. MRT is AL1 over AL2. Can you understand? So, I'd like to explain graphical illustration of two-group one-factor case, right? In original function, like this, right? Q1, C1, Q2, C2, right? Then what happens? Utility curve. Budget constraint is like this. That is budget constraint, right? Budget constraint. Then slope of budget constraint is P1 over P2, right? Same to two-group one-factor case. That is slope of BC, right? And utility maximized at this Otake point. Utility function is like this, right? So at this point A, that is Q1 star is equal to C1 star. Q1 star is equal to C1 star 0. MRS is like this, right? Utility maximization condition is slope of budget constraint is equal to slope of indifference curve, right? From here, we can think about value maximization condition. Perfectly same, right? But, right? So, think about slope of ISO value line. Look at that. Slope of ISO value line is this one. Q2 is equal to V over P2, P1 over P2, Q1. Right? So slope of ISO value line is P1 over P2. Right? That is also, P1 over P2 is also slope of maximized ISO value line. Right? ISO value line is like this. Slope is every time P1 over P2. Right? And I said this one is BC. Also, this is equal to maximize ISO value line. Budget constraint coincides with ISO value line. Can you understand? And I'd like to, I'd like to explain. Then, what is production possibility frontier here? Production possibility frontier, right? Is specified, production possibility frontier is specified like this. Q2 is equal to L bar over AL2 minus AL1 over AL2 Q1. Okay? Slope is AL1 over AL2. Right? That is equal to AL1 over AL2. That is slope of PPF or MRT. MRT is same thing. Right? So this is a budget constraint. Otake generically point. This is a budget constraint. Simultaneously, this same straight line is maximize ISO value line. At the same time, this one is production possibility frontier. Okay? Now think about this. Compare this one and this one. Right? Utility function, same. Budget constraint. That is also budget constraint. Also, At the same time, maximize ISO value line and production possibility frontier. These three, 1, 2, 3, same to this one. Maximize utility curve, maximize ISO value line curve, and budget constraint curve. Right? Until now, perfectly same. Only one difference between two good two-factor model and two good one-factor model is production possibility frontier. Here, production possibility frontier is like this. And slope of production possibility frontier is like this. Right? But two good one-factor case, PPL also coincides with budget constraint and ISO value line. Right? And this is MRT2. Right? This is MRT is also horizontal line like this. Can you understand? So you have to structurally understand graphical illustration and mathematical formulation there. Right? So perfectly same thing. Right? That is Otaki general equilibrium point. Can you understand? Right? So this is a basic tool to study Heckscher-Ohlin model. Right? This is a workhorse to study Ricardian model. Okay? In international trade. So if you can understand this graph and that's mathematical illustration, you cannot start international trade theory. Okay? So you have to fully understand graphical illustration and mathematical formulation simultaneously. Okay? Before quit this explanation, I'd like to explain miscellaneous one thing more. So anyway, two good two-factor case or two good one-factor case. We know that budget constraint coincides with maximized ISO value line. What's the meaning of this? Budget constraint is consumption bundles of two goods this country can afford, consumer can afford, right? So consumption. And ISO value line is value of the product, in other words, production of two goods, or GDP simply, right? So production should be equal to consumption in equilibrium, right? So lots of some people believe that we can consume more, right? If we have some good mind or something, but that is not true. More consumption means more production. Without more production, you cannot consume more, right? Consumption and production going together. So that is really important point. Okay, so that is workhorse of Heckscher-Ohlin model, and this is a workhorse of Ricardian model. International trade model, we standardized international trade model is Heckscher-Ohlin model or Ricardian model. Okay, so before we moving chapter 3, I would like to explain what is Heckscher-Ohlin model and what is Ricardian model, right? Ricardian model said, explain trade between some, for example, developed country and developing country, right? This more than 200 years ago, right? At the time in Europe, UK was only one developed countries, right? At the time, Germany was developing countries, right? And there are two goods, agricultural good and manufacturing good. At the time, we know the patterns of trade between UK and Germany. UK exported manufacturing good to Germany. In other words, Germany imports manufacturing good from UK at the time. At the same time, Germany exports agricultural goods to the UK. And in other words, UK imports agricultural goods from Germany. That kind of thing happened, right? At the time, most people know that UK is more productive in producing Q1, right? Manufacturing goods. So UK has absolute advantage in Q1 production, right? Also a comparative advantage in Q1 production, right? Manufacturing production. And Germany was comparative advantage in agricultural production. So they can produce each exporting good with cheaper cost than partner countries, right? So at that time, lots of politicians and people believed that, for example, from the perspective of UK, we have to learn free trade in manufacturing goods, right? Because UK can produce manufacturing goods with cheaper cost than Germany. But UK have to learn protectionist policy in agricultural goods. Why? UK has had cost disadvantage in agricultural good production. So at the time, UK want free trade in manufacturing goods and protectionist policy in agricultural goods. Okay? Then what happened in Germany? In German, most of German, 99% of people believe that German have to operate free trade in agricultural trade because they export agricultural goods to UK. But they have to organize some protectionist policy in manufacturing goods because Germany has a comparative disadvantage in manufacturing sector, right? That is the background of protectionism in Germany. And list, right? Protectionist policy is really popular at the time. So then, what happened? UK want free trade in manufacturing goods, but partner country want protectionist policy in that sector, right? Also, Germany want free trade in agricultural sector, where UK want protectionist policy. Then, how to solve this problem? Right? At the time, David Ricardo answered for this kind of question. The answer for this is simply free trade of manufacturing and agricultural sector simultaneously. Right? German's best strategy is free trade in agricultural sector at the same time manufacturing sector simultaneously. Then national welfare of both countries can increase. That is number one conclusion. That is first explored by David Ricardo more than 200 years ago, but still most of presidents, for example, President Mr. Trump and other people, lots of Korean politicians believe that. They don't believe Ricardian in size. But Ricardo was correct. Okay? And the other contribution of David Ricardo is then, so why UK has comparative advantage in manufacturing, whereas Germany was comparative advantage in agricultural goods? Why trade happened simply? Because differences in productivity. Okay? Because of differences in productivity, trade happened between developed and developing countries, or two countries. Okay? In this setup, for example, look at that. Production function is 1 over AL1. In that case, marginal product of labor, 1 is 1 over AL1, right? That is marginal product. In one factor case, labor productivity is needed. If Ricardian model expands in many factor model, productivity. But in one factor case, just labor productivity, right? Differences in labor productivity or total factor productivity, trade happen between two countries. UK is more efficient, more productive in Q1 production. So they export manufacturing goods and import agricultural goods because Germany is more productive in Q2 production, agricultural production, right? So why trade happen? Because differences in productivity or labor productivity. So because of that, trade happen. That is number one thing. Number two thing is, as I said before, after free trade in exporting sector and importing sector simultaneously, national welfare of UK and Germany increased simultaneously, right? So economics is not zero-sum game, right? Positive sum game. Only free trade, after free trade, two countries' welfare can increase. That is a conclusion of David Ricardo. But still, lots of some leaders world don't believe this. So I know one Nobel laureate, Paul Romer, he said, still 99%, 5% of world elite still do not understand comparative advantage. Right? So we study comparative advantage here. Right? Okay. Also, I'd like to explain absolute advantage and also number two, in Heckscher-Ohlin model. Heckscher-Ohlin model is very same to Ricardian model in the sense that liberalized competitive sector, exporting sector and importing sector simultaneously can result in increasing national welfare, both countries simultaneously, only by trade, liberalization in comparative advantage sector and disadvantage sector simultaneously, right? And number two, in number one, same as in Ricardian model, but number two is explanation why trade occurs between two countries. Ricardian model said differences in productivity, differences in technology, or differences in labor productivity generate trade between countries. But Heckscher-Ohlin model explained that because of differences in factor abundance, trade happens between two countries. What is this? Think about trade between Korea and Australia. Korea is labor abundant country, right? Now think about two good two factor model. Two good is Q1, Q2, C1, C2. Two factor is labor and land, for example, right? And Korea is labor abundant country, labor supply, right? Relatively higher than relative labor supply in Australia, labor abundant country. That means Otaki wage rate cheaper than Australia, right? And the Q1 production, manufacturing production, use lots of labor input instead of land input, right? Then Korea can produce manufacturing goods with cheaper cost than Australia, right? How about agricultural production, food or beef? Q2, right? Food or beef is land-intensive product. Land input is more important than labor input. And Australia is land-abundant country compared to Korea, right? That means rental rate of rental rate of land is cheaper than Korea because lots of land supply in Australia. So Australia can produce beef or food in cheaper cost than Korea. Okay? So that is Heckscher-Ohlin model. Differences in factor abundances, factor endowments, trade happen between two countries. That is Heckscher-Ohlin model. Ricardian model explained that trade happen because differences in productivity, technological some gap, or labor productivity. So standard trade model is Ricardian model plus Heckscher-Ohlin model. Okay, I'd like to add three things more. So number one, MRT. We already studied the MRT in one factor case, AL1 over AL2. Well, two factor case, anyway, MRT. And in microeconomic foundation, I explained that MRT is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2, right? Opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2. So MRT is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2, right? To produce one more Q1, how many units of Q2 can be sacrificed, right? That is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2, right? And I said comparative advantage and absolute advantage. Absolute advantage means anyway they can produce with cheaper. So one factor case, low, when productivity is higher than the other. For example, so in two good one factor case, MPL1 is 1 over AL1, right? So that is absolute advantage measured in terms of marginal product of labor or average product of labor or simply labor productivity. In one factor case, marginal product of labor is equal to average product of labor. So I said labor productivity, right? So labor productivity decides, right? Magnitudes of comparison of labor productivity in two countries decides absolute advantage. In each country has absolute advantage, more productive than the other, right? That is absolute advantage story. Comparative advantage story is country has comparative advantage in, for example, in Q1. When opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2 lower, cheaper than opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2 in foreign compared to opportunity cost. Low opportunity cost means comparative advantage. Okay? Then now think about MRT is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2. Right? That means MRT decides comparative advantage. Can you understand? When there are two countries. So I would like to emphasize production MRT here. So, like this. Right? That is number one thing. And number two thing is international trade. That is Otaki general equilibrium point of one country. Otaki means no trade. Domestic consumption of good one is equal to domestic production of good one. Right? C1 is Q1, C2 is Q2, C1A. I'd like to A instead of star. Q2A is equal to C2A, like this. Right? Q1A, Q2A, like this. And that is P1A, P2A, like this. Right? That is Otaki general equilibrium point. So Otaki means no trade. In other words, trade happen starting from this Otaki general equilibrium point. After trade, then what happened? Now think about this. Korea, as I said before, comparative advantage in Q1 in terms of Q2, advantage in manufacturing. And Australia has comparative advantage in food production. In other words, Australia can produce same good, same agricultural good with cheaper cost than Korea, right? And Korea produce same manufacturing good, Q1, with cheaper cost than Australia, right? Then, what happened after trade? So Otaki general equilibrium point is here, for example, in two-good factor case. Now, after trade, what happened? Right? After trade, domestic consumption is not equal to domestic production in sector 1 and sector 2. Because after trade, so Korean consumers now want to consume Australian produced Q2 instead of domestically produced Q2, agricultural good. Why? Cheaper. Right? Simply cheaper. And after trade, we can access to Australian farmers. Australian farmers can export their beef and food to Korea. Then what happened in price of Q1 manufacturing good? In Otaki situation, domestic production only demanded by domestic people. But after free trade, Korean firm can export comparative advantage good Q1 to Australia. In other words, consumers can consume Korean produced manufacturing cars. Why? Cheaper than Australian made one. Okay? That kind of thing happen. Simply talking, we know demand and supply, right? So consumption, demand. Domestic production is supply. So in Q1, in Otaki situation, Q1 is C1A, simply talking. But after trade, equilibrium condition is Q1 is equal to C1 plus X1, or foreign consumption of foreign demand, or export demand, right? Domestic demand plus export demand. That kind of thing happen in comparative advantage sector. Simply talking, that is supply, that is demand. Demand, other things being equal, demand larger than supply, because foreign demand or export demand added, right? Then what happened? Demand increase, supply same, then price of that could increase, isn't it? Right? So price of comparative advantage could increase after trade, right? Now, then think about what happened in Q2. In Otaki situation, Q2 is equal to C2 before trade, right? Q2 is equal to C2. But after trade, what happened? Q2 plus M2 is equal to C2. Domestic demand. Now, in Otaki situation, domestic consumers demand domestically produced agricultural food only. But after trade, Korean consumers can purchase foreign produced beef. That is import, right? Domestically produced food, foreign produced food. That is import, right? So that kind of thing happens. So in comparative disadvantage sector, agricultural sector, supply, total supply increase. So other things being equal, supply increase, increase in supply leading to decrease in price, right? So P2 decrease. Price of comparative advantage good, manufacturing good increase, and the price of comparative disadvantage good, right? Decrease. So we know this kind of situation in 1980s, right? Banana supply, banana demand, and banana supply. Large banana importation is really hardly difficult at that time. So banana price, P2, is very expensive. So I could enjoy banana only when I'm hospitalized. Okay? But now, price of banana is really cheap food. Why that happen? Because of liberalization, importation, import supply, right? So, relative price of agricultural goods decrease after trade compared to Otaki price. And P1 increase, manufacturing good increase because of exportation opportunity or foreign demand, right? P1 increase, P2 decrease after trade. Then what happened? We're moving there. Consumers solve utility maximization problem in Otaki situation, but after trade, P1 increase, P2 decrease. Then what happened? This budget constraint rotates, right? Rotates. The slope of budget constraint increase, right? And what happened in value maximization problem? P1 over P2, as I said before, this one increase, this one decrease in Korea, right? Then country have to produce value maximization problem again. Okay? Consumers have to solve utility maximization problem again to find Q1 after trade, Q2 to C1T and C2T. Everything changes. And we can find new general equilibrium after trade. That is international trade theory. Okay? So in two good cases, now like this. Production possibility frontier doesn't change after trade. Same. Right? indifference curve, utility curve, same anyway. Nothing changes. Only one difference compared to autarky level is slope of budget constraint, slope of ISO value line increase, P1 over P2 increase. Can you understand? Right? Then what happened? Right? So after trade, simply like this. That is new budget constraint, new ISO value line, and production, and like this. That is UT. And consumption point changes from here to here. Also, production point changes. Production possibility frontier wants to touch high size of value line. That happens here. That is QT, production point. Right? Q1T, Q2T. Consumption is budget constraint, won't touch highest indifference curve. Now, consumption point is here, CT. Then that is C1T, that is C2T. autarky situation, Q1 is equal to C1, but not anymore. In comparative advantage sector, this country's production decided by value maximization problem, that is Q1T. But domestic demand for that good decided by utility maximization solution after trade, that is C1T. C1T is smaller than domestic production. The gap between the two is export to foreign, right? That is exportation of Q1. Now think about this one. Can you understand? So this country has comparative advantage in Q1. So Q1 production increase and Q2 production decrease compared to autarky general equilibrium point, right? And this country's production greater than domestic consumption in manufacturing good. The gap between the two is exported to foreign, right? That kind of thing happened. And what happened in comparative disadvantage sector in Q2? Domestic production of Q2 is smaller than compared to autarky production level of Q2, right? Because of comparative disadvantage sector shrinks, right? But domestic consumption of agricultural goods is higher than autarky level. And look at the C2T greater than Q2T. Where is the gap between the two? That is imports from foreign country, right? That is M2. Can you understand? That is Heck-Shorley model or some standard trade models, graphical illustration of this. Okay? International trade is simple. We're starting from autarky general equilibrium point, but after trade, price of comparative advantage good increase and price of comparative disadvantage good, agricultural goods price decrease, then slope of budget constraint, slope of ISO value line changes, then consumer solve utility maximization problem again to find C1T, C2T, right? And firms or countries solve value maximization problem again to find new Q1T and Q2T. Q1 production increase, Q2 production decrease. Can you understand? That is conclusion of Heck-Shorley model, isn't it? Right? And why then this country export Q1 and import Q2? Because this country has comparative lower comparative advantage in Q1 or comparative disadvantage in Q2, right? And what's the meaning of comparative advantage in Q1? Lower opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2 than foreign in Q1 production, right? And higher opportunity cost of Q2 in terms of Q1. So this country import Q2, right? Low opportunity cost of Q1 or comparative advantage indicated by MRT. MRT is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2, right? So this case means MRT in Korea, home, right? Lower than MRT in foreign. Star means foreign from now on. Partner countries. That is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2. That is opportunity cost of Q1 in terms of Q2 in Korea, home. Right? We can produce same good with cheaper cost, relatively cheaper cost. So lower MRT than 40. So we have comparative advantage in Q1 than Q2. Can you understand? That is actually conclusion of Heck-Shorlin model, especially Stolper price version of Heck-Shorlin model. Price version of Heck-Shorlin model, that kind of thing happen. Relative price change after price. Price increase in comparative advantage sector and price of comparative disadvantage sector decrease. Right? Then this kind of thing happen. Export happen in comparative advantage sector and import happen in comparative disadvantage sector. So we can explain patterns of trade between two countries. That is graphical conclusion of standard trade model. Right? Now think about a one-factor case. Same. Right? One-factor case, we can think about home has comparative advantage in Q1 and comparative disadvantage in Q2. Right? Then what happened? After trade, price of Q1, P1 increase, and price of comparative disadvantage good, P2 decrease compared to Taki level. Right? So P1 over P2 increase. Then consumers have to solve utility maximization problem again to find new consumption bundles of two goods, C1T and C2T. And country or firm have to solve value maximization problem again because relative price changes. For example, that is similarly like this. In two-factor model, like this. But that is production possibility frontier, right? Anyway, in production possibility frontier, no change. Production possibility frontier, same. Right? No reason of change in production possibility frontier. But slope of budget constraint increase. P1 over P2 increase. Slope of ISO value line increase. P1 over P2 increase. Right? So, like this. That is budget constraint after trade. Right? Also at the same time, ISO value line after trade. Right? But production possibility frontier is like this. Right? Then, what happened? In this situation, consumers solve utility maximization problem again. Budget constraint and find higher utility level like this. That is UT. That is UA. Consumers' utility level increase. Right? That is new consumption point. That is C1T. That is C2T. Right? Consumption basket moving here to here after trade. And touching higher utility level. So national welfare increase, consumers' welfare increase after trade. Also, country or firm solve value maximization problem again. Right? Production possibility, that is production possibility frontier, as I said before. And there are lots of ISO value line with higher slope than Otaki situation. Right? Then maximize ISO line. ISO value line is this one too. Right? That is BC after trade. At the same time, ISO value line, T after trade. Right? Production possibility frontier, and you want to touch high ISO value line. Then production occurred at this point. Right? That is QT. In other words, in two good one-factor model, this country only produced comparative advantage good Q1 with no production of Q2. Right? We said perfect specialization. Q1 increase in a way of perfect specialization. In two good two-factor model, Q1 production increase. Right? But not fully. So we said partial specialization occurred in two good two-factor model. But perfect specialization occurred because QT is here. QT is here, but QT is here. At the same time, corner solution. Right? Budget, production possibility frontier, 1 point. Production should be occurred. 1 point on this production possibility frontier and want to touch high size of value line. That happened here. Then what happened? Domestic production is this one, QT, Q1T. Domestic consumption decided by consumers is this one, C1T. The gap between the two is exportation of Q1, X1, right? The exportation happened in comparative advantage sector. And these countries at this production point, value maximization point, production of Q2, comparative disadvantage sector production is equal to 0. But domestic consumption is C2T, right? So that is importation of 2. C2T is equal to M2T. Most supplied by foreign. Okay? That is conclusion, graphical illustration of Ricardian model.